Everybody, thank you so much for coming out so bright and early. It's good to see everybody. Many of you know the Sesquip was formed in 2012, and the goal was really to enable quality improvement to optimize outcomes. So the registry also, in case you didn't know, fulfills the American Board of Surgery Maintenance of Certification. But more importantly, I think it offers the opportunity to collaborate on research that can improve the quality of the care that we deliver. So I just wanted to share with you a couple of things that the committee has been working on and will continue to be working on before we get to the research talks. So we will be coming out with push reports, and you'll see this on your Sesquip dashboard. The data is only as good as its completeness, and so these reports will be put out quarterly to provide information regarding data completeness summary, and also, in addition, a rotating quality metric, which will be benchmarked to the Sesquip community. And I mentioned collaboration and research, so one of the collaborative projects that we were able to accomplish was a fellowship log module where the current endocrine surgery fellows are able to log their cases into Sesquip. This is not part of the research infrastructure, but it was launched in 2020, and we have 24 of 25 programs with participating fellows. They have been 10,000 logged cases. And finally, the opportunity to do research with Sesquip is tremendous. So as of February of this year, we have data from 67 unique sites, 322 surgeons with over 73,000 cases. The applications will open soon for research data proposals. This past year we had 8. And so we welcome you to put in proposals for research. It'll be open until July 2023. And you can go to the website for instructions and to submit proposals. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Aida and Paul.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming very early to this meeting. These were the talks that were selected by the CESQIP committee. The first up is Alaa Sada. She'll be talking about incidence of venous thromboembolism following adrenalectomy. Each talk will be 3 minutes with 2 minutes for questions.
Well, good morning. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to present. This is the Cisco disclosure. Incidence of postoperative VTE or venous thromboembolism following adrenalectomy is largely unknown. The aim of this study is to evaluate the incidence of VTE in patients undergoing any type of adrenalectomy and identify risk factors. We conducted a retrospective study using the Sesquip database, and we included adults undergoing adrenalectomy between 2014 and 2022. And VTE was defined by developing pulmonary embolism or deep venous thrombosis within 30 days after surgery. We had a total of 2,567 patients. Median age was 55, 60 were females, and 15% of these patients were reported to be on anticoagulation before surgery. Surgical approach was minimally invasive in the majority of patients, 90%, and 10% had open surgery. Of patients who underwent minimally invasive adrenalectomy, 61 had anterior approach, 25% had posterior approach, 11% had robotic adrenalectomy, and 3% had assisted adrenalectomy. The diagnosis was benign in the majority of patients. It was 87%, compared to 13% who had malignancy, which included both primary adrenal malignancy and metastasis to the adrenal glands. And 20% of the entire cohort had hypercortisolism, which included both clinical and subclinical Cushing. Luckily, the rate of VTE was very low, and it developed in 0.27%, and at a median of 8 days from the time of surgery. We found that the rate of VTE was higher in patients with prolonged hospital stay, as the rate was 0% in patients who stayed less than 2 days, compared to 0.72% in patients staying over 2 days. We also found that VTE correlates with pathology, and it was more likely to develop in patients with primary adrenal malignancy compared to patients with benign or metastasis to the adrenal glands. Also, we found that VTE correlates with the operative time, and it was more likely to develop in patients as the procedure took longer, and there it was 0% in adrenalectomy that lasted less than an hour. And we also found an association between VTE and mortality, as the 30 days mortality was 14% in patients who developed VTE compared to the patient who did not. We did not find a difference in the VTE rate in patients who have hypercortisolism versus no hypercortisolism, and also between clinical versus subclinical Cushing. And also we found that the VTE rate did not differ by age, sex, or patient BMI, or the operative approach. So in conclusion, we found that VTE following adrenalectomy is very uncommon. However, we found that the incidence is slightly higher in patients with primary adrenal malignancy, longer procedure, and also patients with longer hospital stays. Further studies are needed to determine the optimal perioperative and postoperative VTE prevention in the high-risk group. I want to thank the Eyas, and I'm happy to answer any question.
Thank you, Alaa. Any questions?
Laurent Bruno from Nancy, France. How do you explain that the patient with hypercortisol have the same rate of than the patient without cortisol secretion?
So that's an interesting question, and there are other studies in the literature that patients with hypercortisolism at higher risk of VTE. I would say our theory that maybe their rate was not different is, and I don't know the practice, it varies by institution, but a lot of endocrinologists or endocrine surgeons, they put this patient on more aggressive VTE prophylaxis regimen. I know, if we have a Cushing syndrome, we discharge this patient on 30 days of Luvonox. So I think that's why maybe the rate was lower, because of we are more cautious about it and trying to prevent it in this patient.
If I may, a second question, how is it captured in the database, the fact that they are hypercortisol or not? You have the exact number, for example, of cortisol at 8 hours, or is it just a box you have to click? How is it captured in the Sesquip?
So it's captured as a categorical variable. So there is diagnosis if this is Cushing syndrome versus Cushing disease, and there's another categorical variable if it is clinical versus subclinical. But there's no dexamethasone suppression test or lab test per se. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, so next up is Patricia Conroy. She'll be talking about parathyroid surgeons use intraoperative nerve monitoring selectively.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to present our work. These are our disclosures. Recent studies have suggested that intraoperative nerve monitoring may be associated with lower risk of vocal cord dysfunction after thyroidectomy. However, it is unknown whether this applies to parathyroidectomy. Our aims were to investigate nerve monitoring practice patterns among high-volume parathyroid surgeons and to examine factors associated with vocal cord dysfunction after parathyroidectomy. Using Sesquip, we identified patients between 2014 and 2022 who underwent parathyroidectomy. Those with preoperative vocal cord dysfunction or those missing data on vocal cord dysfunction were excluded from analysis. Joint point regression analysis was used to calculate the annual % change in the proportion of parathyroidectomies with nerve monitoring use, and multivariable logistic regression was used to determine factors associated with nerve monitoring use and to compare outcomes between parathyroidectomy with versus without nerve monitoring. To compare surgeon-specific trends in nerve monitoring use, the Sesquip parathyroidectomy and thyroidectomy datasets from 2014 to 2021 were combined. Nerve monitoring was used in just under half of parathyroidectomies between 2014 and 2022 in Sesquip. After adjustment, patients with prior neck surgery, recurrent hyperparathyroidism, secondary or tertiary hyperparathyroidism, concurrent IOPTH monitoring, non-localized or multi-gland disease were more likely to undergo parathyroidectomy with nerve monitoring. Compared to patients undergoing focused parathyroidectomy, There was no difference in the likelihood of nerve monitoring use for patients undergoing bilateral exploration or conversion to bilateral exploration. There was no association with nerve monitoring and vocal cord dysfunction after parathyroidectomy. However, longer operative time and prior neck radiation were both associated with increased odds of postoperative vocal cord dysfunction after parathyroidectomy. Joint point regression analysis revealed one joint point in 2018. Between 2014 and 2018, there was a statistically significant increase in the proportion of parathyroidectomies in Sesquip performed with nerve monitoring, followed by a plateau in the rate of change between 2018 and 2022. In the combined parathyroidectomy and thyroidectomy datasets, 41% of surgeons used nerve monitoring routinely, we defined as greater than 90% of their cases, compared to 65% of thyroidectomies. Among the surgeons who used nerve monitoring routinely in thyroidectomy, only 57% used it routinely in parathyroidectomy. Among these, factors associated with nerve monitoring use in their parathyroidectomies included patients with prior neck surgery, secondary tertiary hyperparathyroidism, multi-gland disease, and non-localized disease. In conclusion, we found that parathyroid surgeons use nerve monitoring selectively. Surgeons who routinely use nerve monitoring during thyroidectomy may be more likely to use it during parathyroidectomy. And finally, we saw that the use of nerve monitoring has increased over time in parathyroidectomy, but has plateaued in recent years. Thank you. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Oh.
Good morning, Massa Javid from University of Louisville. Did you ask what type of nerve monitoring are used? Is that accessible? Because there are so many different ones now becoming available, or ones that don't even need the ET tube.
That's a wonderful question. Unfortunately, we don't have that granularity of data. It's just a categorical variable used versus not.
I have one question for you. So what variables would you have liked to see in Sesquip to better do your study or improve Sesquip?
I think in this specific study, I think to that point, what type of nerve monitoring was used, whether it was planned in the operation or whether it was added later on, that might be an indicator of a more difficult dissection or something that the surgeon wasn't planning for. Things like that would have been interesting to look at.
Thank you very much.
Good morning. Antonia Stephen from Boston.
sorry.
First of all, thanks for a great presentation. So I think one of the biggest challenges in endocrine surgery is the definition and the assessment of postoperative vocal cord dysfunction. I sort of know a little bit about this, but how is that defined in terms of a data point in Sesquip, and how much utility or accuracy do you think it has?
That's a wonderful question. As far as I understand it, it is defined in Sesquip as laryngoscopy confirmed vocal cord dysfunction, so it is very specific.
Is the implication to that that every single patient in this study had a postoperative laryngoscopy?
Correct.
Thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to move on to our third presentation, Outcomes of Parathyroidectomy by Use of Intraoperative Parathyroid Hormone Assay by Dr. Cartwright and colleagues from Nebraska Medical Center.
Morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm Sara Cartwright, and I'm going to talk about outcomes of parathyroidectomy by use of intraoperative parathyroid hormone assay. Let's see. And this is our Sesquip disclosure. So intraoperative parathyroid hormone monitoring is one of the contributing factors to the ability to perform a localized, minimally invasive parathyroidectomy. The AES guidelines do recommend IPM for a focused parathyroidectomy, but it can be performed with or without IPM. At the time of the study, there were no previous Sesquip evaluations of IPM use and outcomes. So we did a review of parathyroidectomy for primary hyperparathyroidism with or without IPM. Inclusion criteria were adult patients undergoing index parathyroidectomy for sporadic primary hyperparathyroidism between 2014 and 2022. So we had a total of just a little over 16,000 patients that met inclusion criteria. IPM use was seen in about 96% of the time. Mean age of patients was 61 years old, and females made up 77%. So IPM use was associated with non-Black patients, high pre-op calcium levels, intraoperative nerve monitoring, outpatient surgery, longer operative time, and lower clinical concern for post-op hypoparathyroidism. Regarding operative approach, focused exploration was actually seen in, Focused exploration was actually seen in slightly a higher percentage in the non-IPM use group, and focus converted to bilateral was seen in more often in the IPM group. So in conclusion, IPM use is common among surgeons at Sesquip participating institutions. Again, it was associated with non-Black race and ethnicity, longer operative times, lower rates of concern for post-op hypoparathyroidism, and higher conversion from focus to bilateral neck exploration. But many surgeons at these participating institutions who do not use IPM still perform focus exploration. And we found no difference in cure of PHP at 6 months. Some of the limitations include mostly database related. Lab values are categorical, like low, normal, high, very high, and being limited to predetermined questions. Thank you, and I'll take any questions.
Dr. Sipperstein.
Rise and shine. Hi, Alice Sipperstein here. Question, you mentioned follow-up. Could you give me an indication of what % of patients have been followed for what period of time? And what criteria do you use for cure?
I don't know the percentage of patients that followed up. I don't know that we have that data, but it was long-term was considered 6 months, short-term within 30 days.
Yeah, I guess Lila Morris-Weisman, Baltimore, Maryland. I think sort of coming off of that, and kind of what can we do in Sesquip to make it a little bit more useful. I think the categorical variables for this in particular, because at 6 months sometimes the PTH and calcium aren't quite right, but they may not be elevated. And so I think this is a really difficult issue to look at in the current database. I personally wish we could even just make notes, or something to sort of indicate, like, here's what I'm thinking about this case, so it would be useful if you're going back on your own patients. So just my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and our next presentation will be Predictors of Extent of Surgery for NIFTP Nodules among Sesquip Surgeons by Dr. Krumeich and colleagues from Harvard Medical School, MGH, Boston.
Thank you for the opportunity. We have no disclosures. A landmark study in 2016 reclassified a subset of papillary thyroid cancer as the indolent tumor known as NIFTP. This was intended to reduce extent of surgery, as hemithyroidectomy alone is sufficient for the diagnosis and management. It was estimated that this would impact up to 15% of thyroid cancer patients. However, because this is a pathologic diagnosis and because there may be other concurrent diagnoses warranting a total thyroidectomy, our institution previously estimated that the impact would be closer to 3%. We therefore sought to expand on these single institution data using the Sesquip collaborative platform. We therefore performed a retrospective cohort study evaluating patients who were undergoing a partial or total thyroidectomy with a pathologic diagnosis of NIFTP as captured in Sesquip. We performed a backward stepwise multivariable regression to identify variables associated with undergoing a total thyroidectomy. In the dominant table here, you can see that most patients underwent an ultrasound and an FNA preoperatively with a variety of Bethesda characterizations found from that. Most patients were undergoing surgery for a nodule or for a multinodular goiter. And in the pie chart, you can see that 41% of the patients underwent a total thyroidectomy. Not shown is that 2/5 of these patients had a multinodular goiter and about 1/3 were complaining of symptomatic compression. On our multivariable regression, factors associated with undergoing a total thyroidectomy included older age, Hispanic identity, symptomatic compression, higher Bethesda on the FNA, and the presence of a multinodular goiter. Factors associated with undergoing a partial thyroidectomy included Bethesda 3 and a more modern year of surgery. We therefore conclude that in this study of 338 patients with NIFTP from the Sesquip platform, that over 40% have undergone a total thyroidectomy. Decision-making about extent of surgery is challenging when the diagnosis is made postoperatively, so we are making decisions on incomplete information. But some of the thyroid features that we found that were correlated with total thyroidectomy included the presence of a multinodular goiter, symptomatic compression, and Bethesda 5 and 6 categorization, even though these ultimately were indolent tumors. And so we also found that 25% of these patients didn't have any of these features, and so we have further investigation into other factors that are influencing decision-making, such as nodule size, molecular testing, and others which weren't available in the database at this time. Thank you, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Question over here, yes.
Was the NIFTP lesion the index lesion for the surgery? How often was it incidental?
Sorry, did you say how often was it incidental?
In other words, the
Sorry.
people had thyroid surgery. Was it the NIFTP lesion that took them to the operating room, or were several of these patients, the NIFTP was an incidental finding in a multinodular gland?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting point because, NIFTP is always found on final pathology, and all we know from Sesquip is that most of the patients had a nodule that was the reason for surgery, but we can't tell if the FNA even was done of the nodule that was ultimately determined to be NIFTP or if it was elsewhere in the specimen. So we actually did a more granular study at our own institution looking at about 180 patients with NIFTP. And we did find that a lot of the similar findings, so if they had a higher Bethesda in that nodule itself, it did correlate with undergoing total thyroidectomy, although we also found in our single institution study that if patients had a second FNA of another lesion, that also was an independent predictor of undergoing a total thyroidectomy, regardless of what it showed. But in this database, we can only capture the dominant nodule, and so that's one of the things we thought could be improved is, how are these nodules correlating with the final pathologic diagnoses?
Great, thank you. All right, I think we'll end with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. So I would like to now just invite Barry Inabnet to come on up and just give us some updates in the Endocrine Surgery Quality Foundation. And then also David Schneider as well.
Good morning, everyone. How's everybody doing? Come on. We have food here this morning. Yes, this is a much better turnout than 4 years ago when there was only stale coffee, so this is great. Good morning. So my disclosure is that initially I did not have any slides for my presentation. But yesterday before the gala dinner, I prepared some slides to share sort of the journey that we've gone through with Sesquip, so you'll understand a little bit more about where we've been, where we are, and where we're headed. So the way this really started, in 2005 to 2010, many of you in the room may know that I also performed weight loss surgery. And I was very involved with the two first registries that allowed us to begin to monitor patient outcomes. First was BOLD. That was the brainchild of an AAES member, Walter Porres. It was in the private sector. And then there was a registry that was formed by the college. I think the first one was MBSQ. And there was a little bit of a political turmoil, and ultimately they merged to become the current MBSA QIP program that now has over 1.5 million patients in their registry. And it really has revolutionized the field of weight loss surgery by allowing the monitoring of outcomes that has greatly impacted patient care, where I can remember in the late 1990s telling a patient, you have a 1% chance of dying if you undergo a gastric bypass, to now where very complex weight loss surgery operations, the mortality is less than 0.06 in a very high-risk patient population. And that's largely attributed to having data that can be monitored and followed and understood, and there can be quality improvement programs launched from these registries. So one day I approached Walter and I said, Walter, we need this for endocrine surgery. What do you recommend? So we sort of brainstormed. Again, Walter Poirier, Eyas member, was involved in the early phases of this. And that led to this seed being planted. So in 2008, James Lee, Fiamu Noraku, and I made the pilgrimage to Essen, Germany, to learn how to perform PRA. And in typical Martin Valls fashion, he did 13 adrenalectomies and 11 patients in 8 hours. It was incredible. We were mesmerized, and I remember we had jet lag, we were having an espresso. Someone said, would you like some coffee? And we were like, yes. And it was between the 5th and 6th case, and Martin Valls comes running in with his hands scrubbed. He's like, what are you doing? Get up. And we jumped up and ran back in the operating room to watch. It was an amazing day. So I learned how to do PRA and brought that back to New York, and shortly thereafter started performing this. And then on January 11th of 2011, my 32nd PRA, I had operated on celebrities, TV personalities, and whatnot. I had a patient die on the table during a PRA. And it was incredibly, even today, very upsetting. So this is another talk for another day because there's a lot packed into this. But 3 weeks later, I was in a meeting in Texas, and I saw another fellowship-trained endocrine surgeon that we all know, and I said, hey, how are you doing? What's going on? He goes, I'm not doing so well. I just had a patient die on the table during a right PRA. And I had been told by our legal team not to discuss this with anyone, not to say a word. And of course, my pride was in the way, and I did not even confide to that more junior person that I had just had the same thing happen 3 weeks before. Mine was the left. I got into the confluence of the splenic and portal vein, and the patient with Cushing's, and his was on the right. He got into the vena cava. So this put a bee in my bonnet that we needed to have a way to track our outcomes. If it's two people here who are very skilled, well-trained surgeons have had the same awful, devastating outcome in patients, we needed to better understand our own data and our outcomes. Now, I was moved to give this talk. I've never talked about this in public before, ever, and a few of you have perhaps confided in, but this, January 11th is right before MLK Day, and I was in my chair's office, and obviously I was devastated, and he handed me a piece of paper with this quote, and I was so moved, and I saw this quote in the Museum Institute the other night, and anyway, it stirred up these emotions, and that's why I'm presenting this. Then, I think it was a 2011 meeting, it could have been in 2012, I can't remember, but I pulled Nancy Perrier aside and confided in her that I had this awful outcome and I needed help because there was going to be a lawsuit. I didn't know who to turn to, I didn't know who to talk to, and I said, you can't be a witness because I'm talking to you, and you'll if you're deposed. So, good old Quan Du, I didn't approach Quan, but he was approached. Ultimately, there was a lawsuit and it was settled, and Quan's deposition actually was incredibly helpful to me to allowing for a more favorable outcome to this just awful situation. So anyway, then in the fall of 2011 at the ATA meeting, it was in Palm Springs, many of you in this room were there. We were having cocktails after one of the sessions, and Electron, Nancy, and Julianne and we were together. I said, hey guys, I have this idea. We need to develop a registry for endocrine surgery to understand our outcomes. So we began to get excited. We talked about what this would look like, exchanged a lot of ideas. And then we had a series of conference calls, the four of us, to begin to kind of hash this out, what it would look like. And ultimately, we took bids from vendors. We needed to find a vendor to manage the registry. We didn't have any budget, and we ultimately chose Arbormetrics as our vendor. And there were like monthly conference calls to set this up. So in September of 2012, we had a one-day retreat in Ann Arbor where Arbormetrics is based out of. And you can see all the papers on the table. We were basically mapping out the registry, the data variables. And Paul Gager was supposed to be there, and Paul's here in the audience, and he sent some new faculty member that had some promising career named Barb Miller to substitute for him. So there's Barb providing her great wisdom as we hammered out what this was going to look like, what was going to be the structure, what were going to be the data variables, how were we going to get feedback, how are we going to deliver the data to the people, how is the data going to be protected. I mean, there's a lot that goes into preparing these registries. You can see that John Berkmeyer, Berkmeyer, one of the smartest individuals I know, was there, and Justin Demick, who's the chair of surgery at the University of Michigan, was also there. So very smart people in the room, not including me, but very smart people coming around trying to create the registry. So then at the 2000, I think it was 11 or 12, Southern Surgical Association, Nancy and I were talking, and we sort of coined the term Collaborative and Concerted Quality Improvement Program. And we wanted collaborative to be the first word to emphasize the importance of collaboration. Really, really important. So to move things along, at the meeting in Chicago 10 years ago, we introduced this concept to the AAES membership. Miguel Herrera was president, and he created an ad hoc Sesquip, I don't know if it's a task force or committee, but it wasn't a formal committee because it hadn't been in the bylaws yet. And we invited Anders Bergenvall from Lund, Sweden, to be our keynote speaker and to share his experience with the launching of Eurocrine, which is the equivalent of Sesquip in the EU. A lot of shared experiences. In fact, we have a great gratitude to the British Association and to the Swedish Association and to Eurocrine because they shared all their data variables with us in the spirit of collaboration. And just last week, I got an email from a surgeon from South Africa who wants to start a registry in South Africa and asked if we could share our data variables with them. And of course, we said yes. And Artie and her team are working with them now to do so. So Anders walked us through. We had Dr. Demick there also, and then Nancy and I were also part of this special panel discussion. Then I know Paul and Julianne remember this very well, and Nancy as well, at the 2013 meeting of the IAS in Helsinki. We literally were in a restaurant, and on the back of a napkin, we're finishing the final touches of the thyroid and parathyroid module data variables. I mean, I wish I had a picture of that napkin, but literally it was on the back of a napkin. And we made the data variables, we kind of got them finalized, and then in, I believe it was December of 2013, so 10 years ago, the thyroid module was launched, and the first case is entered into the registry. Now, in 2013, 2014, we rolled out the other method. We did it sequentially, first thyroid, then parathyroid, then adrenal, then PNET, and then GI-NET. And it was far from perfect. There were some growing pains, but the modules were rolled out, and we began to recruit programs to join. And I will say that Dr. Perrier and I, we had no money, no funding. We each secured $20,000 each from grateful patients to donate to Sesquip, which was now housed in the AAES to launch the registry. So they're grateful patients who actually played a role in helping us to have this registry. And I want to congratulate the presenters this morning. I just love seeing these presenters mining the data. There are now 70,000 cases in the registry, so it's really humbling to see. So here are the key dates. So from 2013 to 2015, the Sesquip committee became a formal committee, so it was recognized, and I was the chair of that committee, to be preceded by Dr. Schneider and Dr. Mather. We had to enroll programs. We had developed a DUA that was very complicated. The legal aspects of this, very complicated. And there were some budget problems. We didn't have any money, so Arbormetrics agreed to kind of backload the expense and gave us a grace period to kind of get things rolling. There were some problems with the finances. It was not clear, and this had to do with one of our management companies, and in some ways probably contributed to the divorce we had with that management company because Sesquip was really complicated. So under the leadership of Dr. Labuti and President-elect Sipple, we were advised and elected to create a foundation to house Sesquip to protect the AAES from liability. We were worried that if there was a data breach and the Sesquip were sued or there was litigation, that it could potentially bring down the AAES because the AAES was the responsible entity for Sesquip. So a foundation was created, and I did myself all the paperwork. We filed to be an S company in the state of Michigan, and before you can become a 501c3 entity, you have to be a company. So we were incorporated in the state of Michigan. Kevin Taylor, who's the legal advisor for the Eyas Foundation, is also our legal advisor for our foundation. Then we had to appoint a board of directors. So the initial board of directors was myself as president, Dr. Hanks, Joe Sharma, Paul Gager, and Alan Sipperstein, all who played very important roles in solidifying the foundation and the direction of the foundation. And then in May, in May of 2016, we hired another attorney. We filed the paperwork with the IRS. It's very daunting. We didn't know if we were going to get it or not. And ultimately, we were granted 501c3 status by the IRS in May of 2016, and the foundation then legally became tax exempt, a very important development. And then 1 month later, the AAES, through legal assignment, assigned Sesquip to the foundation. So then the foundation, which is separate from the AAES, then became the legal entity that managed and oversees Sesquip. So in April, we realized we needed to diversify the board. It was all men, and we wanted other ideas. So Dr. Chen, Dr. Sosa, and Nancy Perrier were invited to join the board. We made a lot of progress under the leadership of Joe Sharma and John Hanks. And Joe, I know you're in the audience. This was a heavy lift working with CMS. We were designated a QCDR compliant registry, which allowed us to be recognized by CMS as such, which was a prerequisite to be recognized by the American Board of Surgery as MOC4 compliant. So really, really thank you, Joe. Thank you, Dr. Hanks, for your stewardship in getting us over the finish line there. Then we have kind of been smoldering along, lost a few programs, have gained several programs. In this last year, we've had 6 new programs join. And after leading Sesquip and then the foundation for a total of 12 years, it's time for new leadership and for a refresh. So there was a new board of directors appointed of the foundation, Dave Schneider, Jen Rosen, who has been fantastic, Phil Smith, and then Cord, goodness, his presidential address and his ability to take complicated ideas and simplify them in a structured solution format is really appreciated, because Cord and I had a call. I was like, Cord, it's time. I need to pass this off. And we decided that we would do a reset, and that the treasurer of the AAES would be also have a seat on the board of directors of the foundation, again, trying to connect and better align the AAES with the ESQF. And so I had Tracy's name with 2 asterisks because I knew there was going to be a new person, and Dr. Lip, congratulations, you're now on the board of directors of the ESQF. And I will say that So here's the rebooting of the governance. For the first time, we are in incredible financial state. We actually have a balance of $65,000 in the bank. It's always been paycheck to paycheck break even. This is not a money-making endeavor. And I have been the debt collector doing the AR for 12 years. It has been the most agonizing, thankless job I can think of, going to my friends to asking them to pay their annual subscription. And so, praise the Lord, we have finally an accounting firm that will modernize our accounting, and they're actually quite cost effective. So we've signed a contract, a one-year contract with an accounting firm, and they will be doing all the AR and automating much of the processes and greatly improving communication with the Sesquip participants. So this is really, I can't tell you, no longer will be this my right-hand person, my finance director of my department or my division. This will be a professional accounting firm, moving away from an Excel spreadsheet to an online platform. So this is fantastic. And as I mentioned, this is our 10th year anniversary of the first case being entered. It'll be this December, and we have over 70,000 cases now in the registry. So I'd like to conclude by saying that, remember, the first letter in Sesquip is C, collaboration. And that is really what the AAES is about, collaboration. A very important word. We are poised for the future, and Dr. Schneider is going to take us through, kind of in the next few slides, what lays ahead. We have the American Board of Surgery Quality Initiative. Dr. Bernessa has told us about the opportunities there. We have the practice focus designation, and under Dr. Cipresine's leadership, we have an ongoing dialogue with the American College of Surgeons to develop a quality verification program. And one of the standards of that program, just like with bariatrics, is you need to have a registry. Now, it doesn't have to be Sesquip, but it needs to be a registry. Just like with the American Board of Surgery, it has to be a registry that meets certain minimum requirements. And Sesquip, because it was built by endocrine surgeons for endocrine surgeons, fulfills that criteria. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barry. What an incredible overview, and I don't think I even knew a lot of that history, so thanks. So Barry talked a little bit about where we've been, and I'm going to talk a little bit about where we're going. So as Barry mentioned, we're going to have a little bit of a reboot of the governance of the foundation, the ESQF Foundation. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry. So we began having some discussions late last year and early this year about the need to kind of reinvigorate the ESQF a little bit. There was a desire to have some new ideas, some new energy, increase our participation in the board. And then, as Barry mentioned, he was really a one-man show for the entire duration of Sesquip here. And I think, he mentioned it a little bit, but he's being a little bit modest. I mean, he really was doing a lot of the work. And I want to take a second just to recognize Barry Inabnet for all the work that he has put in. I mean, Sesquip would not be what it is today without Barry's work and dedication. So thank you, Barry. But, that was obviously not sustainable. And so we needed to balance the workload. We wanted to reinvigorate the mission and the vision of Sesquip, and that's part of what we're trying to do here this morning. And then because we had, by necessity, financially separated Sesquip from the AAES, there was sort of this separation, but really Sesquip is, part and parcel of what AAES is all about. And so we wanted to reconnect Sesquip to the AAES. So over the last several months, we've kind of been meeting and discussing how we can kind of restructure the ESQF and kind of formalize some of the positions And these positions will have set terms so that it's not one or two people just having to do all of the work and sort of a never-ending sort of a thing. So these are the positions that I've listed here. We'll have a president of the board. The past president will stay on. The chair of the Sesquip committee, as they're finishing out their term as chair of the committee, will join the board. There will be a secretary treasurer, a member at large, and then as Barry mentioned, the treasurer of the AAES will also sit on the board, and that will help kind of tighten that connection between AAES and Sesquip. So what will all of this do? Well, we hope that it will increase participation in Sesquip and the ESQF and have more opportunities for people to take on leadership positions in both of those organizations. We want to get new people and new perspectives. The formalizing of the terms will avoid burnout. As I mentioned, we'll create a closer connection to the AAES by having an officer on the board. And there'll just create more leadership opportunities for people to participate, as I mentioned. And this obviously is going to be a lot more sustainable than what had been happening previously. So I want to just conclude by saying that I think the future for Sesquip and the ESQF is very, very bright. Not only because of all the things that Artie and the committee are going to do. I mean, I think that slide really that Artie showed at the beginning, over 70,000 cases are now in the registry. Is that the right number? That's 73,000 cases. What a powerful registry that we all have at our disposal for research, for quality improvement. That's incredible. So in addition to all of the things that the committee is going to do, Barry mentioned the focus practice designation and the need for a registry there. Working with the American College of Surgeons and a QVP program, again, Sesquip can serve as a powerful registry for that. And then for the American Board of Surgery and their quality programs and their registry, again, this is a chance for Sesquip to really become integral to those programs as well. So I want to leave time for some questions, but thank you all for coming, and we're happy to kind of have a little bit of a discussion and questions now.
Thank you, Barry and Dave. And I just want to take a moment to thank all of the committee members for all of the work that they have put in this year. And then I'm actually going to turn it over to Eyas and Robin to kind of lead the, what questions can we answer for you about Sesquip? What are your challenges and opportunities?
Hi, Lila Morris-Wiseman, Baltimore, Maryland. I know many of us want to participate actively and have some barriers related to how do we get the data in from the EMR. Do you have any suggestions or tips? Are there ways to get the data in that are, sort of more seamless than just re-entering everything?
Yeah, we don't have a direct interface between our EMR and the database. We do have a data administrator now. We were able to get some funding through quality programs at the Cancer Center to be able to help support that. And I would say, actually, just as a poll of the room, how many institutions have the surgeons enter the data directly themselves? How many of you do that? Okay, so definitely some, but not most. I think certainly it is helpful to have a standardized process and someone who's responsible for that so that you're not personally doing it weekly or monthly or so forth. As you have noticed, that sometimes it's a challenge to get the post-op information into Sesquip. At Mount Sinai, Barry had set up these smart phrases in Epic that when a post-op patient comes in, we just use, F2 and then click enter, enter, enter to say yes or no, whether they have a hematoma, whether they had voice changes or concerns for hypoparathyroidism. And so the person who's going to be entering the data has a much easier time. They just go straight to our post-op note and then get those information straight into the database, and we found that to be very helpful.
Unrelated to my question, but we also have smart phrases that we've used for our data collectors. Do you think it would be useful to post some of these smart phrases on the website so that folks who are using Epic or other electronic health records could just import the smart phrases into their own documentation?
That's a great idea, yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Abby Finger at University of Nebraska. Thank you for the wonderful presentations and for this amazing product that you've provided for our use to track our quality. Many of us are now performing radiofrequency ablation of thyroid nodules, and there is a lack of long-term follow-up, and this is a procedure with an extremely low complication rate, so it will be something that will be hard to track with individual institutional studies. Is there a plan to make an RFA module for Sesquip? And if not, can we make a plan?
Yes.
I think that sounds like a great opportunity for a collaborative project module. So yes, if you can get everybody together and we can submit a proposal, that would be awesome.
Yeah, also something important like molecular markers we're currently not collecting, so we're really open to a lot of suggestions that you guys all have.
Forgive me if you've already covered this, but in planning and implementation over years and many meetings, CESQIP was originally going to track the 6-month outcomes of endocrine surgery, not just cervical, but the only real complication that we have that occurs within 30 days is hematoma. Everything else takes 6 months to diagnose. And then that parameter was dropped. Is it coming back?
No, we do have 6-month follow-up.
We do? No.
It's not as robust as the 30-day, certainly, and that's something I think these push notifications and having people reminded to enter at 6 months, but we do have 6-month data.
Yeah, so I think the platform is able to allow the person or institution to enter longitudinal follow-up, and you can actually enter longer than 6 months. But we are hoping that with the push reports, that will prompt people to continue to enter that follow-up data. All right, well, thank you all very much for coming this morning. I think we have a few announcements before we break.